Okay, so thanks for coming. Shalom. We're going to talk a little bit about continuous deployment, demystifying continuous deployment. How many here are doing continuous deployment? Show of hands. Oh, very few. Very few of you. Okay. Why are you not doing it? What? You're not there yet. Okay. What are the biggest risks that you're facing? Yeah. Testing. Okay. So what do you think you need then in order to get to a point where you can do continuous deployment? You need all the automated tests. Yeah. How many do you need? Okay, comfort. Right. Is anyone else in the same situation? In other words, you want to do continuous deployment, but you don't have enough automated tests. Others, show of hands, how many people are in that same situation? If you had enough automated tests, you would feel comfortable doing continuous deployment. Also an automated pipeline, continuous deployment pipeline, right? And okay, so this is about demystifying this stuff. So let me just first say we don't have a lot of time. I learned continuous deployment. I started doing this. Here's what happened. Probably 2007 or 8. I got a message from Kent Beck. Kent Beck is one of the creators of extreme programming. And he said, you got to go check out this video. This guy just released a video called Doing the Impossible 50 Times a Day. This was the one I mentioned earlier this morning. Right? Doing the impossible 50 times a day. And this was the video about IMVU deploying to production many times a day, 50 times a day, whatever it was. Now, unfortunately, that video is gone. This is a crazy story, but the internet service provider for that they lost the video. It's a terrible thing. Timothy Fitz ended up writing a blog about it, but he was the guy giving the original speech. It blew my mind. It totally blew my mind, this continuous deployment speech he gave way back then. And within a year or so, we were doing it in my company for our e-learning software. That's our e-learning software there. We actually have an album devoted to continuous deployment. It's right here. And I'm not really here to show you the album, but I thought I might want to be able to show you stuff. So we have been test driving this software, this e-learning software, since the beginning of the product. So we have the suite of automated tests, right? It's a very comprehensive suite. We have low-level micro tests, we call them, right? You might call them unit tests, we call them micro tests. They're very small, very fast. We have all the tests you could possibly need, from Selenium tests to lots of tests, 2,000 plus automated tests for this. So we have the safety net to deploy and feel comfortable, right? So what I want to show you real quick is our road to continuous deployment. No, I don't want to show you that. Well, we could talk about that real quick. You see this here? Culture. You need to have a culture that's ready to do continuous deployment. Now, do you know the difference between continuous deployment and continuous delivery? Anyone? Do people know this here? Okay, some of you know. This really confused me in the early days because I didn't think there was any difference in the terms. But I got an email from Martin Fowler because I wrote a blog, and he said, "Oh, actually, you're talking about continuous delivery, not continuous deployment." I said, "What are you talking about? It's the same thing." And he said, "Well, no, we're having big problems with big corporations where the corporations are they will do continuous delivery, meaning they're in a production-like environment deploying to that, but it's not actually production. And then from there, if they decide they've blessed that build, then they can press a button and it goes live. That's continuous delivery. Continuous deployment is the code goes all the way to production. Okay, that's continuous deployment. We do continuous deployment. And we teach large companies how to do continuous deployment. We don't do continuous delivery. I am not a big believer in it. Okay? But the big thing about continuous deployment is that there's a difference between deployment and release. Deployment is the code is now running live, but maybe no one is executing it. It might not be executing. It's in the live production environment, but it's maybe not in the direct execution paths, and yet it's live. Or maybe it's in it's live and it actually executes, but only the people that developed it can see it. No one else can see it. It's mostly invisible. So now it's kind of released, but only released privately. Right? So there's all kinds of approaches to the release. Okay. So we start with a culture that says, yes, we want to have a way to continuously deploy. From there, we say we got to get continuous integration working well. Okay, this is not a myth. If your continuous integration is not rock solid, then you're not going to be able to do continuous deployment very well. When I say rock solid, that you would have 1,000, maybe 1,000 deployment, 1,000 CI builds, continuous integration builds, that all pass, right? If you just ran them many, many times over one night, they should all pass, right? You shouldn't be having random failures. You need a rock solid CI. I have had to invest real money, real time, for us to basically nail down some of the few pesky little tests that were misbehaving, sometimes passing, sometimes failing. This is normally around selenium, so I won't get started on selenium, but it's very difficult. But CI needs to be rock solid. Okay, that's one thing. Maybe I'll take that back. My approach to CD is different from Timothy Fitz. Remember, Timothy Fitz has been doing this longer than me. He was the first guy that I ever heard about this from. I've co-taught classes with him. We co-authored this album here together, our continuous deployment album. We made it together. So I know Timothy quite well. And Timothy taught me something which I'll teach you today. Okay? And that is this. You do not need automated tests for your entire system in order to do continuous deployment. You don't need them. It's a myth, right? This is continuous deployment demystified. He surprised me here. He really surprised me by saying this. But here's how he explained it. Let's say you have a big system and it's in production today, right? It's already in production. And whatever risks come with it running in production, those risks are already present. You're already managing those risks, right? Now let's say you need to make a tiny little change. One little tiny change. Well, you can make that change fairly safely by writing some automated tests or doing a tremendous amount of, let's say, manual testing if you really have to do it that way, or both. But you do enough testing so that the tiny little change, you feel safe. And then you can deploy this into production, right? And you could keep repeating that. But if the deployment is a little bit painful because it's not automated, okay, you have more work to do. So you could do a manual deployment to production for that minor little change that's really well tested. And let's say you keep doing that. Now you're doing continuous deployment, right? You are doing continuous deployment. You're not doing it very well. You're not doing it, with quick, easy grace, as the definition of Agile, but you're doing it. And Timothy taught me this. It was not, for me, I felt, oh, you got to have a prerequisites and all this stuff has to be there. Not necessarily, right? And there's advantages to getting things into production fast. For example, if you're really into experiment and learn rapidly, one of the values in modern Agile, experiment and learn rapidly, then you want to get experiments into production very quickly and very often, right? So having a way to continuously deploy safely is a very valuable thing to do, even if you, and so you don't have to spend months and months and months building a tremendous suite of automated tests before you get to do continuous deployment. That's a myth. It's simply not necessary. It's nice, very nice to have, but not strictly necessary if you approach new development with thorough testing. And that's not to say that something won't go wrong. Something could go wrong, and then you need a strategy for either, we call it roll back or roll forward, right? Roll forward is, oh, mistake, we fix it, and we immediately deploy again. Roll back, we saved a snapshot from the past and we can quickly get back to it and safely get back to it. You need to have one or the other. Does that surprise you, what I'm telling you now? Does it demystify this idea that you have to have so many tests? You back there, you had the question. Could you see yourself now maybe trying that? Okay. You're going to have to test. You have to feel safe to deploy it. So, but you don't have to put tests around the entire system. You could say, this is high risk. It needs this level of testing around it for us to feel safe, right? And I would recommend do you know exploratory testing? Are you familiar with that, people here? If not, look up exploratory testing, and it's a manual thing. My friend who knows about, he's very knowledgeable in Agile. He works in a really, really dumb Agile company, a company that it's the worst Agile I've ever heard of in my entire life. It's so horrible. Literally, the product owners assign story points to the user stories. Like he says, this is not really Agile, and they're saying, Mike, we're not doing ivory tower Agile. We're doing it, our way, which is the most idiotic Agile you've ever seen in your life. I can't begin to tell you. And one of the things he said was, we ought to be doing exploratory testing, which who's going to do that? Because it requires manual work. And the product manager said, no, we're going to automate the exploratory testing. That's not, you don't do that. The whole point is that is something you do by hand. So anyway, I want to keep demystifying continuous deployment. Any questions further about that, what I just said? You don't need a full suite of automated tests to deploy. You can just begin by writing tests around the one area you're working in. Is that clear? Now, going back to what someone said over here, you still have to potentially build a way to deploy that's automated. Is that true or false? Is it? Can we demystify that? Do I have to have a completely automated continuous deployment pipeline? The answer is no, you don't. So let me just show you our road to continuous deployment. So the software you're looking at right now is continuously deployed. I could make a change right now and deploy it. In fact, let me see something here. Why is it showing tabs when I said full screen mode? It's weird. I know what I'll do. Make this its own thing. Say enter full screen mode. Still showing tabs. You know that Chrome is continuously deployed? Did you guys know that? Chrome, the browser? Right, when I first got it installed, it didn't have full screen mode. And I never reinstalled it. I never have ever said, oh, I need to upgrade to Chrome version 2.x. Never did. it is deploying stuff to that browser as I'm on the internet. When I close the browser and turn it back on, that's when the new things take effect. But it's constantly it's an example of a desktop app that is doing continuous deployment. So there's other demystifications, right? People say, oh, you can only do continuous deployment for web apps. Not true at all. People are doing it for lots of things. So I just want to walk you really quickly through what happened at Industrial Logic when we adopted continuous deployment. Here's what we had first, okay? So we have dev boxes, developer machines. They check into version control. That triggers the build automatically, CI, right? This is our continuous integration. The automated build runs. We did definitely automate the build, right? So that's done. And then automated tests immediately will run against the automated build. We have a variety of tests from low level to high level and so on. If they all pass, then we basically have to deploy to the release candidate. Or no, actually that's automated too. So that jar file for us gets put into a release candidate location. Any problems with failed builds, failed tests get pushed back, right? This is a sequence diagram in UML. It's actually helpful to see. Now, once the release candidate has been created, we have to manually verify it, that it's okay. Manual verification, very slow. If it's okay, we've eyeballed it, we've looked it over, we think, you know what, this is going to be okay. And again, that's in like a production-like environment. Then we would say, okay, push the inactive app to the live area. Inactive meaning live is here, here's inactive. It's kind of ready to go, but we just pushed it onto the production box. Then we would have to stop the server and deploy the app. Meaning the app is down. This is a web-based app. The users have lost their sessions. So we would have e-learning users from around the world using the e-learning. We'd have to send a little ticker symbol. There was a ticker message saying, in 5 minutes, the site is going down for about 5 seconds. You know, really kind of pathetic, but that's what we did back then. And we would suggest that people log off while we do our deploy. And this is kind of stressful, right? Remember what I said earlier this morning? That a sign of good process is your stress goes down. Let me ask you a question. Do you think your stress would go up if you did continuous deployment, or go down if you're doing continuous deployment? What do you think? How many would think that your stress goes up if you do continuous deployment? Okay. How many think it goes down if you're doing continuous deployment? Okay, more hands go up. What we found was that, to our surprise, we didn't really do it for this reason, our stress went down once we started doing continuous deployment. You know why? This is stressful. What I'm showing here is stressful. And this was pre-continuous deployment, right? We weren't there yet. This was very manual deployments. Having to kick people off the site, tell them, come back in a little bit, we're deploying, do the deployment, manually test that it's okay. Not to mention, everyone had to have their code done on a certain date and time. We have to say, everybody, we're doing the deployment on Thursday afternoon. So Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock, that's when this is happening. Get your code in. That adds to the stress. Imagine if I could release at any time, many times a day. I don't have to coordinate with anybody. I just commit, it kicks off a build, and it's live. That actually is much less stressful. So anyway, we stop the server, then we have to restart the server here, and the users have to log back in, which is a total pain. And then we have to manually verify that that deployment was kosher, as they say. And then, well, we say it that way in the US. I don't know if you guys use that term that way. Do you say it's kosher? What? When you talk English, okay. Mazel tov. All right. Mazal tov. I'm learning to say it the Hebrew way. All right. Manual rollback in the case of a problem. Occasionally there'd be a problem and we'd have to manual rollback. Anyway, I better hurry up, right? How much time do I have left? 10 minutes, okay. So that's this manual release. Then, is this helpful to see this? Are you guys helpful with this? This was in a blog that I wrote too. I put this into a blog, so I can point you to the blog later. Then we automated a little bit of the process here for manually executed scripts, right? We had a one-click deploy right here. So everything else was the same, except that now we had a cluster. This was the big change. We created a cluster. What is this a cluster of? It's a cluster of Tomcat instances. Okay? That's it, just Tomcat instances. Because in our environment, we deployed a Tomcat. The cluster means that, okay, so say the whole build passes, all the tests pass. With one click of a button, a script runs and pushes the deployment, the new jar, all the way to the inactive live. Right? There's active live and there's inactive live. They're mirror images of each other. They're identical production environments. But one's active, one's inactive. One click deploy, we're there. Cool. Manually verify, still manual. Manually promote, great. Except now we're not kicking any users off. This is the critical thing. This is what I wanted to say earlier. You don't have any automated tests for your system, you can still deploy. Just write some automated tests for the little thing you're doing and you can deploy. But the big rub is you can't knock users off their sessions. You can't disturb users. You've got to be able to work in such a way that you have zero, what we call them ZDD, zero downtime deploys. You've got to get to that. For us, the critical thing for doing that was the cluster. Behind the scenes, it just means that the user session data is shared amongst the active live Tomcat and the inactive live Tomcat. The same user session data. You cannot, you need that data. If you have it, you're good. So zero downtime deployment, but still manual, right? Manually, you manually push it there. Manual verification. We did script a rollback. We wrote a script to rollback if we had to. So that was kind of nice because you have active live and inactive live, and you might need to switch from one to the other. So we wrote a script for that. Okay, questions? Yeah. Database changes were something that we first of all, we rarely do them, but when we do the database changes, it follows this whole process here. And we use things like Hibernate, so it picks up the changes for the most part. And you can work in a way where you can continuously deploy with almost all database changes. You have to get very micro with those changes. Little micro changes that you can deploy and migrate over. Sometimes we run migrators. So we test drive the migration script. We test it locally to see that it's going to be okay, that it's going to be fine for memory, and then we run it in production. So sometimes it's a migrator, we call it a migrator. It'll migrate from one data schema to another, and then you can deploy after that. We have not had that. Migrators, for the most part, for us, are done in a safe way, where we're still writing old and new for a little while. So we're still maybe maintaining two sets of data, and then we finish and switch over, and then we delete the old way. So we never lose data. It's got to be a safe operation. There is a whole book on evolutionary database changes, right? So there's prior knowledge around this whole process. You don't have to fear the database when it comes to CD. That's another myth. Okay, so we're getting closer. We have zero downtime and we have some more automation, but we're not completely there. We're still manually promoting. And then for us, the big final step was this one. Mostly automated. So check this out. This is very nice. We've lived with this for a long time. Check in, trigger the build, automated test, build an automated test, pass, inactive live, automated release. See that right there? The automated release just happens. If the tests all pass for the build, it automatically pushes it to inactive live. Then an automatic verification occurs, right? Automated tests run to see that everything's cool with that build. And then we automatically promote it from inactive to active. It's all been automated, every last bit of it. Then we still have some passive monitoring if there's an error. So we haven't automated that yet. Right? This is another, I call this poor man's continuous deployment because, you know, at IMVU, they had a cluster immune system, which was this thing running live, checking on all kinds of health metrics, from the amount of disk space on servers to memory to the typical amount of money being made. Like all of a sudden, if you check something in and there are no more purchases happening, then clearly that last check-in broke something badly, right? So those are the kind of live health metrics. They called it the immune system, right? That they build at IMVU. But it's a different situation. They're dealing with millions and millions of customers at once. In our particular world, see, for us, a lot of this e-learning we produce, it's a product, it's a laboratory, it's all these things, but we do not have millions of users. So it's a little bit easier for us. And we only do the minimum that we need to do to get results. But this changed the game completely. This was literally, you check in something, and it can go live without you ever touching anything else again. No more manual steps. And that's where we stayed for quite some time in this particular world. Then this next one here, I don't even know if we've completely done this next step. This is fully automated. This is also automated monitoring and automated rollback. We don't really have that yet. We have not even invested in that. So we've been living with this other way for years. Yeah. Automated testing. Okay, so the automated testing happens in the continuous integration box, right? That's where we're running tests against the system. The automated verification is simply testing that in this live environment, things that we know should be present in the live environment are there. We can do some basic operations that a user might do in the production environment, like, you know, log in, see what we expect to see when you log in, just stuff like that. They're still automated tests, but they're very, very specific to the production environment. Whereas all the other automated tests are not really specific. You can run them on a development box, any development box, including the CI box. But they don't specifically target what's the environment like in production. Okay, that's the difference. Okay, so that's kind of a little journey we took there through CD. And one of the myths, again, was that you have to have all of this metal, like the cluster immune system. You have to have all these health checks automated, all of this stuff that's going to protect your continuous deployment pipeline if you deploy something that's, you know, that breaks something badly. We, in fact, we don't have that. And what I'm trying to say here is that you don't have to fear continuous deployment if you do enough testing. If you do enough testing and you automate your deployment pipeline sufficiently so you don't knock people off every time you deploy, you can start to do it. What we've found, whether that's at Yahoo or other companies, once programmers start to do continuous deployment, they kind of get a little more professional, right? They do a little more testing. because they don't want to break something in production. So it kind of does a good thing anyway. They become more professional, take a little bit less risks in terms of just checking something in that they know is going to break the build. They don't behave that way. They're a little more careful. But the bottom line is we found the stress goes down because being able to release many times a day allows you to evolve things from very primitive to very advanced. And to do a lot of experimentation. Yeah. Okay, so in our environment, we do mostly pair programming or mob programming. So there is no code review step for us. Okay, if you check it in, it's already been reviewed by your colleagues, right? So even just right here at check-in, right? What you're checking in has already been reviewed by people. So if it'll get into version control, the build will happen, the test will run against it. We're happy. So we're not doing a manual code review process. You can do that. There's nothing wrong with that. You just have to do it and then kick off a build. Yeah, you should know that your code is in production. Yes. Another thing I'll say is this. At Airbnb, you want to talk, so this is poor man's kind of CD, right? It's just very simple continuous deployment. At Airbnb, if you deploy to production, part of the job is to look at the business metrics. They have a dashboard. So you deployed to production, now you get to look at the business metrics to see if you messed up anything. And you stare at them for a little while and see if everything's good, or you see if there's a change potentially in what you were hoping to achieve, right? So that's another thing that they'll do there. But you want to basically have the right level of safety in your continuous deployment pipeline. And starting out, it doesn't have to be that crazy automated thing. It can just be the bare minimum amount of automation to get you started. Because again, you already are incurring risk from having your system in production. So this should not add a lot of risk. And it shouldn't add a lot of stress. So I think we're mostly out of time. I did want to mention that the blog I'm talking about here is on the Industrial Logic blog, and I think it's called Our Road. I think it was called Our Road to Continuous Deployment. Let me see something here. Continuous deployment. It was called Benefits of Continuous Deployment, and it outlines those sections there. So you can just go to Benefits of Continuous Deployment if you want to see those diagrams I showed, and read that article about that. Read that blog about it. You can do that. Any final questions? I know we're just about out of time. Okay, thank you. Thank you.